Hey, by the way, spoilers for Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, as well as probably by proxy multiple MCU movies like Infinity War, Endgame, and the first two Guardians movies, and not really the holiday special, but you probably would have seen the holiday special if you've seen all those other things, so, cheers? I don't know. The Guardians of the Galaxy films are a lot like a suitcase taken on a really long vacation. There's a lot to unpack. A lot has been said about these movies because there is a lot to say about these movies, and even Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, which has been out for 2 weeks at the time of writing this, has a lot to say about a lot of things. One thing in particular that I found fascinating was the theme of letting go and moving on. This theme is present in the narrative and characters of the film, as well as outside of the narrative, as it persists both in the behind-the-scenes production and in the way the audience experiences the film. But before I go too deep down that rabbit hole, I want to talk about the way that letting go applies to the characters and their journeys. This film is certainly a film about letting go, and I think a good place to start with that would be with the film's arguably main character, Rocket. Rocket has held on to a lot for a long time. In Guardians Volume 1, he gets in a fight with Drax because he thinks Drax, and by extension the rest of the Guardians, think that he's a freak. Then, in Volume 2, Rocket is a selfish, arrogant jerk because he's afraid of opening up to his friends. He doesn't think he's worthy of friendship, and he's scared that the Guardians don't actually care about him. Well, here, in Volume 3, we start to understand why. As we see Rocket's backstory progress, we see how he was experimented on, and we see how it affected him. He still holds on to the guilt from losing his friends, from the mostly failed escape, and he hates himself because of where he comes from. His whole being is a reminder of his traumatic past, and he can never move on from that, from who he is, from who he's left behind. Until he can. There's a scene in Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 where Rocket dies and goes to the afterlife. There he sees his friends, who he presumably blames himself for getting killed. But his friends aren't mad at him. In fact, they're happy to see him. They are enthusiastic when Rocket asks if he can come with them, and though he understands that he has a life left to live and people to live for, he's sad that he can't stay with them. However, because of this interaction, he can let go. Before this encounter, his last memory of his friends was of their death because of his failed escape. He couldn't let go of that, of his friends dying and never seeing the forever and beautiful sky, all because of his failed escape. Now, however, he sees that they see the sky, and that they are happy, and they don't blame him. They've let go, and so can he. Rocket also lets go of his self-hatred. Throughout the series, as mentioned earlier, Rocket hates where he came from. He despises who he is, and hates it when people call him a raccoon. In this movie, though, he faces off against the High Evolutionary, the one who made him, and he realizes that he's more than what the High Evolutionary thinks of him. He also learns and accepts that he's a raccoon. He lets go of his self-hatred, and accepts himself for who and what he is. On a different note, Peter Quill is still broken over losing Gamora. However, to his delight, she's back. Only this time, it isn't the Gamora who loved him. Instead, this is a Gamora who does not have any idea who he is, and very much does not care about him or the Guardians. Over the course of the movie, Peter has to learn that this Gamora doesn't care about him, at least not romantically, and he eventually comes to terms with the fact that this isn't his Gamora, and that the Gamora he cares about died back in 2018. This is a bit less emotionally heavy compared to Rocket's story, but it still fulfills Peter's arc in a satisfying way, and seeing him come to terms with losing Gamora is genuinely bittersweet. He realizes that this isn't the Gamora he loved, and he lets her move on and be with the family that she cares about. In addition, if I want to stretch this out more, the High Evolutionary loses because he won't let go of his jealousy of Rocket and the way his brain works. The rest of the team also realize that they need to let go, and the movie ends with the team splitting up and going their separate ways. There's a lot of letting go in Volume 3, and not just on screen. Behind the scenes, there was a ton of letting go. For one, the cast and crew knew this would be their last time working together, so they had to let go of the family that they had found in each other, and from interviews with James Gunn, it sounds like the cast were genuinely friends in real life. As well, many of the cast members, like Dave Bautista and Zoe Saldana, went into this movie knowing it would be the last time that they played these characters. But, most notably, James Gunn had to let go of these characters. These are characters that he injected himself into, characters he cared deeply about for almost a decade at this point. By all accounts, any of the Guardians could return. As I mentioned before, I doubt Dave Bautista and Zoe Saldana would, but the door is open for them as their characters are still alive and well. However, James Gunn knew this would be his last voyage with these characters, this family, and he had to let go. I won't recap it in great detail, but he may have made more Guardians movies and maybe other movies within the MCU had he not been fired by Disney, hired by DC, rehired by Disney, then hired to be the head of DC. Whether he wanted it to or not, this would be his last Guardians movie. Through this lens, I think viewers can see that he was treating this movie like an ending. The feeling of finality permeates every scene. Gunn said in the same interview that I mentioned before that he wanted to make this movie to tell Rocket's story, and you can, again, feel that when watching the movie. He cares deeply about these characters, and whether it was his plan or not, he had to let go of them after this film. In saying that, one thing that I find interesting is the way he lets go of these characters. Many people are annoyed by this film that none of the main characters died. It isn't that these people enjoy it when characters they care about die, it's because this is the end of their story, and the trailers made it seem like they would die. It felt cheap to a lot of people that everyone would survive. This is the end of the road for the Guardians. Why not kill off one of them? Especially when the movie has such a dark tone. Well, there are a couple of reasons why I'm glad that all of the Guardians survived. Mainly because I heard a fake spoiler that they all died at the end, and I was glad that that wasn't the case, but also because James Gunn left these characters to be written and directed by different filmmakers. In that week or so that I was certain every Guardian would die, I thought that it was a good move by James Gunn. These were his characters, and killing them off would assure that he was the only filmmaker that would bring these characters to the big screen. Or small screen if you want to bring up the holiday special. But even in seeing the logic, that felt somewhat selfish. Gunn injected himself into these movies. He made them James Gunn films, but he didn't make the Guardians. He adapted the Guardians, and though they are my favorite movies in the MCU, these characters aren't solely James Gunn's. Maybe it's a bad idea that these characters are alive and well in the MCU. Maybe Marvel is going to take the heart and soul of these films and characters and rip it right out, but James Gunn shouldn't stop it. He still wanted to provide a satisfying ending, thus why the group disbanded at the end of the movie, but he knew that these characters weren't owned by him, weren't created by him. The Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy is a James Gunn trilogy. The films are James Gunn films, and within the context of the movie, the characters are James Gunn characters. But Rocket Raccoon is a Marvel character. He's more than just James Gunn, more than just Sean Gunn, and more than just Bradley Cooper. James Gunn lets go of these characters not by killing them off, but by letting another filmmaker try their hand at telling a compelling story with these lovable misfits.
I want the Guardians to continue myself. That doesn't necessarily mean with Chris or with anybody, but I would like to see the Guardians continue in another iteration. So I really do. I would like to see that as a viewer, and it's, I think it's cool that we started this thing, and I'd like to see it keep going. I don't feel proprietary about that.
Another way this movie lets go is by letting the audience let go of the MCU. I've seen reviews for this movie essentially saying that it's a good place to leave the MCU, and whether or not that was James Gunn's intention, there are valid reasons for that. For one, the Guardians are some of the earliest MCU characters still around. Thor is the only character introduced before the Guardians who is still active in the MCU, but his latest movie had the slight issue of not being good. As well, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 is a movie that feels like the old days of the MCU, in the sense that it's good and actually cares about its characters more than setting up a multiverse. Finally, this movie actually provides an ending, which Thor Love and Thunder also doesn't do. This movie feels like a genuine conclusion. It's an actually good MCU movie, and it's the last time we'll see Marvel characters we've loved since the early days, written and directed by the filmmaker who made us fall in love with them. In some ways, I doubt Gunn was intentionally giving fans a place to stop caring about the MCU, but he does, whether intentionally or subconsciously, give them an exit point. In a franchise of never-ending introductions, this movie is a conclusion. It actually ends these characters' stories, and it does so in a way that makes me feel okay if I never see these characters again. This was Gunn's last Guardians movie, and on top of wanting to tell Rocket's story, I think he wanted to conclude the story he was telling. And, in doing so, He created a point for many to end investment in the MCU, a point for audiences to let go of these characters and stories that they've cared about for over a decade. I feel bad for whoever makes the next Guardians-related movie. Imagine being the person who has to make an MCU movie, an already overwhelming prospect, but on top of that, said MCU movie is a continuation of one of the only franchises in the MCU with a distinct directorial vision and beloved flawed characters. Whoever this person is has to do something stylistically interesting that doesn't feel like something James Gunn would do, but also something that doesn't feel like something James Gunn would specifically not do. I hope the best for this person. I hope the Star-Lord movie is unique and interesting and takes the character on a new, unique, and personal journey that only this filmmaker could make. One that adds new depth to the character and gives him a new, beloved team of characters to love and fight for. I hope it's amazing, because these characters deserve it. But if it isn't, that's okay too. Guardians 3 gave me all the closure I needed to let go.